Hello, everybody. My name is Dave Jackson, and you're listening to Tales from the Backlog. This is a video games deep dive review podcast where each week I'm joined by a guest to bring a game out of the backlog, play it, and discuss. My guest today is a friend of the show, a writer and journalist for Pop Matters, Gamers with Glasses, and NPR, among other places. He's also a podcaster and member of the New York Video Game Critics Circle, and he's looking for a group of men in black suits. Welcome to the show, Luis Aguasvivas.
Thank you for having me, Dave. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on. We have a really interesting game to talk about today, one that you suggested to me to play and do on the show. Today we're going to talk about Shenmue, which is an action-adventure game developed by AM2 of CRI and published by Sega for the Dreamcast in 1999 in Japan, 2000 in other regions around the world. Shenmue was directed by Keiji Okayasu, and if this is your first time listening to the show, here's how spoilers work. And thank you for stopping by. If this is your first time listening, thank you for clicking on a new podcast. Here's the spoiler policy. We're not going to spoil the story of Shenmue for a while. You can check down in the show notes for a timestamp for when the spoilers will begin. Until then, we're not going to talk too much about what happens in the story. And honestly, the spoiler section in this episode is going to be pretty light compared to a lot of other episodes. I think the meat of discussion about Shenmue is not necessarily about what happens in the story per se. So, what is Shenmue? We have some elevator pitches for everybody. Quick pitch from me. I say Shenmue is Forklift Simulator 2000. And Luis, what is the elevator pitch for you?
The daddy of Yakuza and Like a Dragon.
That's right. Yeah, I had to wear my Ichiban Confection shirt special for this episode. We're paying homage to the ancestors here tonight. And I'm sure we'll talk about the Yakuza series a little bit in comparison as we go. Now, I played this on PS5. I played the remaster. It took me 16 hours to beat. And is that about how long a playthrough would take you?
I beat it in about 13 hours, but I'm a veteran with the game, so.
Gotcha, yeah. So that leads us into our kind of opening section of the show here, talking about our histories with Shenmue. So the guest always goes first, and you have more history to speak of than I do. So tell everybody, when did you first play Shenmue? What was it about it that led you to want to play it in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I first played Shenmue, it was late 2000, so the year that it came out. What led me to play it, I mean, it was, if you follow games at that time, that was everywhere. Like, that was, you had the, what was it called? Like, I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's supposed to be something like Free Roaming Eye Entertainment or something of the like. Which is what Shenmue's supposed to be like.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think actually the moniker / like genre of like action adventure really fits like really cleanly with it as a game. Yeah, I played it then. I was captivated by the graphics and the look of it. Somebody who, had aspirations of like visiting Japan at some point. It was the closest thing to that point,
Yeah, right.
I played it again 10 years later in 2000 on the Dreamcast as well. And it's odd. I didn't have as good of a time when it came to like the gameplay, but I definitely was able to appreciate it more in regards to what that game meant, right? Like a decade later. And then now I replayed it. I played parts of it when the remastered came out a few years ago. And then this upcoming time, I, did my third complete like playthrough of Shenmue 1 on the PC, which that's new. I mean, I know they did some changes, but for the most part, it's the same game.
Yeah, it still felt like a game from 1999 for sure. So I just played this for the first time, and I like I said, I played the PS5, PS4 remaster, and they touched up the resolution and stuff like that, but it didn't feel like they messed with too much other than that. My history with this, it's not necessarily the same as a lot of these other retro games that I missed because I didn't have a Dreamcast or anything like that. But you said that like if you were following games back at the time, you couldn't miss Shenmue. And I read a lot of gaming magazines back then. So all these games on like the PlayStation and the Dreamcast that I didn't play, I read a lot about them in the magazines. Shenmue was like all over the place. And I just remember reading the magazines thinking about, how cool it looked, and like the magazines all talking about how like it's on this schedule and all the characters have their routines, and like people go this place at this time, and if you want to see this character, you have to like know when they're going to be in certain places and stuff like that. And the first time I'd ever heard of a video game doing something like that. So I was super interested, but I never played it. And then I kind of just like forgot about it. Like, I don't think a lot of people talk about Shenmue that much anymore. But as I've really gotten into the Yakuza series, and you'll see out there that this is one of the progenitors of the Yakuza series, both, coming from Sega, and there are common people working on both of the games. So I felt like this was something that, as a huge fan of Yakuza, I wanted to play this, not necessarily because I thought I would like it, but just like I do these gaming history tour stops every now and then, like I play some of these games and I don't necessarily think I'm going to like it, but I want to see what it, gaming history really. And, this was a big surprise to me because I actually did really like this. Like, it's one of those games that when we get into like the meat of the episode and we start talking about like, here's what the combat's like, here's what you're doing in the game, here's what the story's like, there's not a whole lot in there that I really loved. If you put bullet points, make a list of stuff I love versus stuff I didn't like. But I really think this game is greater than the sum of its parts, and the experience of playing Shenmue was cool. Like I enjoyed this. It goes against a lot of things that like you would expect to be doing in a video game, or the way you would expect a story to work in a video game. But there's like this intangible quality to it. Like you can really see the artistic vision come to life here. And so even though I didn't like the combat, and you spend probably like half of the game driving a forklift, like, I mean, I liked driving the forklift. I'll just say that right now. But like, it's a weird game. It's really strange in a lot of ways, but I really like this. And then from that Yakuza fan angle, I saw so many things in here where I was like, they just took that. That's exactly in Yakuza. Like, bumping into thugs on the street and getting into a fight. Like the mannerisms of those encounters are exactly the same. And then there's a bunch of other stuff, of course, like, playing arcade games and stuff like that. A lot of stuff that I was like, it's in there. It's in the Yakuza series. And like, I had read it was like a blog or something like that, was like begging people to not make comparisons between Shenmue and the Yakuza series. And so I was like, sure, when you evaluate Shenmue on its own, right? But the guy who created the Yakuza series worked on Shenmue, so it's not like this is a connection that people made up. So that angle was really cool too. So all told, I had a good time with this. What was your experience like revisiting it 25 years after it released?
A bunch of emotions like overcome me when I played it this time around, because it is one of the most bizarre triple A, if we can call it that, right? That term wasn't used at the time.
Back in the day, yeah, it's an expensive game.
At the point of its release, if I'm not mistaken, it was the most expensive commercial release video game of all time. I think it's cost over $70 million. But when you see the game and you see like what it actually is, right? Because if we think about like extremely expensive games, they're games that are epics in the full extent of the word, right? It's like you have like these massive worlds, they're usually like fantasy driven, or it's games where like the set pieces are also like massive. Like think of something like the like Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah.
The Grand Theft Auto. Shenmue is very compact, very well contained. It's, well, we forgot to mention this at the beginning, but it's actually, its creator is Yu Suzuki, who is not only one of the great like game developers, but it's somebody who he's mastered a lot of different forms of games, specifically regarding like arcade action games
Hmm.
and racing games, and one of the early innovators of 3D in games. But he takes this to make a game that is takes parts of all these things, but is also unlike anything that he's ever worked on. Hence why a lot of the game itself is somewhat awkward, I think, because
Hmm.
there's not really that much experience. And it's, I talked about free, which I butchered like the acronym. It really means, I think it's like full reactive eyes entertainment, which has to state where you're able to interact with much of the world, and the world
Yeah.
itself also functions within like its own like internal like logic outside of you the player. Like people do their
Yeah.
own things. I mean, it's essentially, think of like Skyrim, but in like a, well, somewhat modern like setting, like in Japan. Yeah, going back to it and seeing that, it's like, wow, like 70, you spend essentially as much money as you can on a game to make one what feels like a very personal thing, and also it's very earnest and not very pretentious. I mean,
Hmm.
the story's somewhat awful, like the actual like plot is somewhat awful, but it's fairly straightforward. It's like this kid, he's going about town essentially trying to get revenge for something that's happened. Not gonna, we'll go into spoilers in a little bit, but
Yeah.
most of your interactions are just like about town, and then eventually it just completely drops, and then you're just like, work. It's just like work at a port simulator,
Yeah.
essentially. Yeah, I wonder what, I mean, a lot of games take a lot from Shenmue. I mean, GTA 3, for example, we're talking about Yakuza. I always feel that like Shenmue's a game that, I wouldn't say that Shenmue failed per se, but it definitely didn't like meet the expectations of Sega.
Yeah.
But it's essentially was created and did what it did so other games can like run, essentially, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely, even if you don't like the game, even if you don't even enjoy the gameplay, if you take it within context, you're like, it's really hard not to appreciate what it was doing in 1999, 2000. Um and even now, like, very few games even do what it does. It's essentially a cozy game. It's like a,
It
right?
kind
It's
of
like
is.
it's really charming. It has a lot of charm.
Yeah, I would definitely describe Shenmue as more influential than successful itself. Like, as especially as like a series. Like, I think both of the first two games were not great commercial successes, and then the third game had to go through like a big long process to get made and stuff like that. But it is one of those games that, like, anyone who's played a game with, like a day and night cycle and characters that follow along. It's like from back in this time, is like Shenmue and Majora's Mask are the only two that I can think of that really worked like this. And so you play games that have stuff like that, you can probably trace it back to Shenmue. And it is kind of cozy in a way. I mean, you get in a few fist fights along the way, but it is a lot of just running around checking up on people in town, playing arcade games, stuff like that. So it is a really interesting one. We'll put a pin in these various talking points. We're going to listen to a bit of music. We'll set up the story of Shenmue when we come back. Shenmue was written by Yu Suzuki, as Luis said earlier, and it had a screenplay credit to Masahiro Yoshimoto. And in the opening cutscene of Shenmue, we have like this kind of framing cutscene at the beginning, at the end, a couple times throughout the plot here. There is a young woman out kind of like in the countryside, it looks like, looking out over a cliff as an eagle flies around. And she talks about a young man who will come from the Far East, who does not yet know his potential. And these cutscenes kind of center around this young man. And this young man is your main character, Ryo Hazuki. The game is set in 1986 in Yokosuka, Japan, which is a real place. So we do have like a kind of period setting in here in the 80s. And again, you play as this teenager named Ryo, who is a young martial artist. And the opening event, the inciting event that sets Ryo on this quest is he comes back home to find his father in confrontation with a Chinese man named Lan Di. And Ryo's family runs a dojo next to the house on their kind of compound where they live. Lan Di is demanding that Ryo's father hand over this artifact, a mirror. There's a little bit of a fantastical element to Shenmue. We're not really sure how deep it goes, how magical things are, if they're magical at all, but we have these artifacts. So this mirror, Ryo's father refuses to give it over, so Lan Di threatens Ryo's life. They get in a fight. Ryo's easily, knocked down. Ryo's father hands over the mirror, and then Lan Di mentions that his father had killed somebody in the past, and then he kills Ryo's father and escapes. So that is the story setup for Shenmue, and that is your driving quest for the entire game, which is to investigate, find out who this person is, why he wanted this mirror, why he has beef with your father, find where he is so that you can get revenge. And it's one of the things that was kind of surprising to me playing Shenmue is that the plot itself is very straightforward. And if you were to list out, what happens in the story of Shenmue 1, it's very predictable in a lot of ways, and it does not end on a satisfying note, in my opinion. Maybe in a different life, we would have done this episode about Shenmue 1 and 2 to see maybe if the story was more finished at the end of Shenmue 2. I haven't played that, so I don't know. But I did get the feeling like they finished this game and they're like, yeah, Shenmue 2 is coming. Make sure you play that if you want to know what happens in this story. So am I on the right track there?
Yeah, you are. And Shenmue 2 definitely provides a lot more narrative, backbone to the overall story. But even that, they made a Shenmue 3, right?
That's
so
true.
Initially, Yu Suzuki's plan was to make this into a trilogy. It'll be a trilogy that would everything. And the third game was supposed to be essentially much larger than the first two.
Gotcha.
And that even after Shenmue 3 was made, it didn't really pan out that way for various reasons. But I would say I think both games are excellent. Shenmue 2 does a lot of things better than Shenmue 1 in regards to I think the hub, call it a hub world, the main town and locations are extremely interesting, and there's a lot to do in regarding side quests.
Yeah.
And I think that stories, let's say it's more exciting. The combat though is, if you thought the combat in Shenmue 1 was lacking, in Shenmue 2, even though you have more fights, it's just the system is just completely broken. So Shenmue, the first two Shenmues, they actually use the same engine for fights as a previous Yu Suzuki game, which is Virtua Fighter.
Yeah.
And I understand, it's 3D, and Virtua Fighter is not a game it's not flashy, right? And it's part of its appeal, supposed to be a quote unquote more realistic take on a fighting game. So you have real fighting styles that exist, or and I think a game is grounded as Shenmue as is initially intended release. That makes sense, but the engine within the 3D spaces, it's very awkward. It's not very exciting at times. You're constantly the camera is constantly just it's your biggest enemy. That's the early stages, right, of 3D video games. The camera that's the final boss, but it's it's omnipresent, right? It's there all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're getting in fights like pretty often throughout the game, and like some of it is in that 3D fighting engine, as you said. Some of them are just QTE sequences, and from what I've read, this is a game that is influential in popularizing QTEs within story sequences in games. And I definitely enjoyed the QTE sequences more than the fights, more than the action fights. We'll say that. And I hate fighting games. Like, I'm a notorious fighting game hater. I like Super Smash Brothers is about the only one that I've ever had any kind of fun with. So like, I was playing this and be like, do I just suck at fighting? Like, I do suck at fighting games. Like, is that it? But I've played enough of them at this point to play Shenmue and just be like, nah, this feels bad. This does, like, Street Fighter. I'm bad at Street Fighter, but Street Fighter doesn't feel bad to play. Like, this feels bad. So there's a difference in the experience there for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I remember even playing it back in like 2000, and there'll be like a weird like lag feel in the game, specifically like in the combat. And yeah, that's never gone away.
Yeah.
It's yeah, I think if there is one thing that is, in my opinion, just unsalvageable for the game, it is the combat. I mean,
Yeah.
to the extent that when Shenmue 3 just completely dropped the whole like Virtua Fighter like engine, but that game has other issues.
Yeah. So I've heard. So so you get in a bunch of fights. You're on this revenge quest in Shenmue. And so we said like the plot itself is pretty light. You spend most of your time doing one of two things, like story-wise. You're either going around town asking people like, have you seen men in black suits? Have you seen any sailors? Have you seen these people? Have you seen sailors meme at this point? Or you spend like the second half of the game actually working at the harbor and then like gathering information in your free time, like on your lunch break and stuff like that. So the plot itself, pretty simple. This being a revenge story, some of the, requisite themes of revenge stories are here, right? Like, this character has a one-track mind for revenge, and other characters around might be dragged into it. Other characters might have, concerns. They may be neglecting other things in their personal life, stuff like that. We'll talk about a little bit of that in the spoiler section, but it is very light. I think what a lot of people are going to come away from Shenmue with, as far as story goes, when you think of the story in Shenmue, I think a lot of people are going to remember the town itself of Yokosuka and the people around the town, especially some of the more prominent side characters like Ine-san, the old woman that helps out at home, Fuku-san, who is Ryo's friend, a friend of the family that works at the dojo, and then Nozomi, who is a kind of love interest character for Ryo, and then Tom, of course, Tom. Everyone's going to remember Tom. So I think that this is like, it's going to be what I remember more than like individual plot points in the story of Shenmue, is I'm going to remember the town. I'm going to remember going around town, checking up on people. We'll talk about the gameplay in a bit, but it's what you're doing a lot of time. You're going around talking to people, trying to gather information. So I'll remember like, the pharmacist or the guy who works at the sports store or the guy who sells secondhand jackets and stuff like that are around town. The weird guy who works at the arcade. I think that's probably more important to the experience of Shenmue as far as storytelling and characters go than like the plot.
No, I definitely agree. I think that the town is the star. It's odd also how lived in it feels even now, like going back to it. I mean, a lot of it, like the basic layout is exactly taken from parts of Yokosuka, which actually is a place where a lot of US like servicemen used to live there. So hence like why you see Ryu's wearing like that aviator like bomber jacket on, like you see a lot of that there. And even now too, you can go there and get like a lot of like secondhand stores that sell vintage U.S. like military clothing.
Mm.
Is really interesting. It helps a lot to. I don't know if you know this, but they actually like implemented and like the weather, like the historical weather records
Oh, okay.
of of the time around the time that the game took place. So like
Mm-hmm.
if it rained there in December in December
Yeah,
3rd, 86, it's gonna rain like at that exact same time.
that's pretty
And
cool.
yeah, and it's done in a way that it doesn't feel, because at this point now, like in a lot of games, like you have dynamic weather effects and everything and changes, but it does feel like it just feels like something that just happens, right? At least for me, like in Shenmue, it feels. I think also too because the days are somewhat long relative to a lot of video games. It
Yeah.
does feel like more. It does feel like a more memorable situation, and there's just something about like walking through the streets
Mm-hmm.
of while it's like raining in that game,
Yeah, or when
and
it's
you're
snowing. Yeah.
and it's also it just feels like a place that people live in, and then eventually you as the player like you live in, like it feels like home in
Yeah.
a sense, right? Because I mean, I'm from New York and I've traveled a fair bit. And when you're in specific places where you don't necessarily feel at home and you don't know very well, and there's some abrupt weather like rain, it automatically like kills your mood or you feel like very uncomfortable. You try to
Mm-hmm.
get to shelter. Sometimes you don't know necessarily where to go. But if you do that around your home, it's like, yeah, it's raining, but my house is around the corner, right? Like,
Yeah.
for example, like
Yeah.
it's not in Shenmue, eventually, as a player, you get that same sense of feeling. It's like, yeah, it's raining, but this is where I'm supposed to be. Like it's
Yeah.
not, and it's really interesting how like a game can like engender those type of feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't really felt that in any other game besides Shenmue.
I would say, after 10 Yakuza games, like I feel at home in Kamurocho, but I definitely agree with you that you get that same feeling here. And it's a credit. Like you can see, you were talking earlier about like where the budget goes in expensive games these days. And I think you can see that like they really made sure that this town feels like home for people that are playing it, that it feels like a real place. And it's the visuals, it's the weather, it's the characters and their schedules and stuff like that. It's the attention to detail, like in the shops. So the town is broken up into like 4 sections. There's like a couple of neighborhood sections, there's the shopping street, and then you can like see a little bit of like the bigger part of town, like the busier part. The game takes place in like these side streets and neighborhoods. And then there's the harbor where you work. And you can tell the attention to detail in like the shops. There's a meat shop and stuff like that. Like they have meat set out on display and it looks like meat from a video game in 1999, but it's out there and the attention to detail is there. And in the neighborhoods, the houses look like these, quiet, kind of like suburban, but old school, not like, big apartment buildings and stuff like that. These are more old school houses. And Ryo's house especially is like even more old school than that. Like that's, more traditional type of, with like the sliding paper doors and stuff like that. All that stuff is there. And I lived in Asia, East Asia for a long time. So like these kind of like not quite countryside, but kind of like more quiet areas and like the older houses. It looks like where my in-laws live in Korea. So it felt like home in that way for sure. And I think that's where a lot of the attention, the time, the money, the man hours went in making this game. It sure as hell didn't go into making the combat feel good, but it went into making this place feel real. And I feel like that was the biggest goal of this game. And I think it's one of the biggest wins of this game is that this is just a very pleasant lived in place to play a game in.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a live place. And it's also the cast of characters like helps
Yeah.
tremendously too. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
interact with them enough where you start seeing like their personalities a bit. I mean, it's not you don't have like a lot of like character progression at all actually in the game.
Right.
But it's there's enough there that you can make something out of them. I mean, Nasumi, right? She has like her own situation that develops. I don't know if we are going to talk about that yet, or we're going to wait for like
Yeah.
spoilers. And then, I mean, Tom. I don't really. I just. Oh man, Tom.
Let's
Tom
talk
is
about Tom.
unforgettable. Tom is unforgettable. No matter what version of the game you play, if you play it in Japanese or you want the camp experience and play it in with the English voice acting,
Yeah.
which it's its own thing. I actually, yeah, it's Tom. My
So
God.
for those who haven't played, Tom and his girlfriend, I forget if it's his girlfriend or his sister, but they're the only two people of color in the game. There's some other like foreign people. Of course, there's the Chinese people, and then there's some other white people in the game too. Tom runs a hot dog stand, and Tom's just portrayed in this very, stereotypical way that you might expect from foreign media 25 years ago. And so Tom's always dancing. He's always got this hip hop beat blasting from his boombox at his hot dog stand. He's a very nice character. He's super helpful. Like, it's not like he's portrayed in like a super negative way. It's just very stereotypical. It's like they tried to cram a bunch of black stereotypes into one character because there's only one character to do it with, really. But I like Tom. And it's not my place to say who should be offended by what. I just, I played this and I was like, oh yeah, depictions in 1999. Yeah, that's how it was, I suppose. But yeah, Tom's weird. I played it the Japanese dub. In the Japanese dub, and it's not just Tom, it's a bunch of the native English speaking characters will say. They actually speak in like this broken English and Japanese mixture that felt very real to me as someone who learned a language while living somewhere, where like if I didn't know the word, I would just throw the English word out there in Korean pronunciation and hope they understood what I was talking about. And so that, like, it was weird to see in the game, but it did kind of remind me of myself speaking a language that's not my native language. I understand the English performance for Tom is real weird though.
Yeah. No, it definitely is. It's he's played by Ryan Dries. A lot of the just the directing of voice actors at that time was also I mainly fault that. Anything else. And at this point, like Tom's like English like voices, it's transcended bad. Like it's become like like you go to Shenmue for that. Like, it's like, oh yeah, I need to listen to this. So you mentioned his partner, Tom's partner. It's like her name's like Honey Johnson, and that's his girlfriend. For this story. And
that's right.
When I first, so I'll tell you like my evolution with Tom essentially. When I first saw Tom in 2000, I was like, "Are we allowed to curse on here?" I don't.
Oh yeah.
I was like, "What the fuck is this?" As a person of color, I was just like, "Who is from the Caribbean?" I mean, I'm not Jamaican, but I'm from the Caribbean. I know a lot of Jamaican people, and I was like, "Wait, he's American, but he's like this like fake ass like Jamaican like accent." Like it was just like so many. It's like the barrage of stuff was just so many that it's like I was just flabbergasted by it.
Yeah.
But like you said before, like the character himself, like Tom's like a good person, and he's portrayed like he's a decent person. It's not like a stereotype who's like a stereotype.
Yeah.
Put in there.
No, he's like top 5, most major characters in the game. Like he ends up helping Ryo out a lot, like throughout the game by, he runs a hot dog stand, so he sees stuff. So he's got information from time to time. Like he's a genuinely helpful dude.
Well, and the Japanese voice acting isn't the same as in English. Like as you were saying, he speaks broken Japanese, but this is something that's like expected. And it's also something that you see with other characters who aren't Japanese. So it's like, all right, I mean, he's like always like dancing outside of like his car, but I don't think anything was meant by that. I think it was more of like, this is just like a cool guy,
Yeah.
essentially, and then you see like later games, you see games like Jet Set Radio or anything where like everybody's like dancing and like all this stuff. There's definitely stereotypes going on there, but it's not malicious. It's just a lot of like, it's just a situation where there's not that cultural sensitivity, and
Right.
also like knowledge that comes to be like, you wouldn't see Sega doing something like this in like 2024. And
Right.
yeah, but the voice acting, I'm always shocked because it's an American who does the voice acting, but he
Uh-huh.
doesn't sound American. He sounds like he flips between this like broken Jamaican accent to this, sometimes sounds like if he's like your Chinese like neighbor's like uncle from Chinatown type of, and you're just like, what? And it just like keeps going like back and forth. It's extremely odd, but
It
over,
sounds bizarre.
but he's endearing though. I think
He is.
he teaches you probably the best move in the game.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's super helpful in a lot of ways. Yeah. Yeah, the voice acting overall is, even in Japanese, the voice acting is not great for even Ryo or the other, major Japanese characters. It's just, 1999, like there were games that had legitimately great voice acting by 1999, but it wasn't standard for sure. And so Shenmue was fine. I started with the English voice acting and I quickly switched over to Japanese because I figured it would be a little better. The English dub, from what I heard, was, like I said, one of those games had not caught up to the Metal Gear Solids of the world by that time.
Oh no, definitely no. I mean, if you would put the voice acting of Metal Gear next to Shenmue, but it has its charm now, right? Because it's one of those, like I said before, it's like if you want the camp experience, right, that very campiness, you would definitely go and like play the English version.
Yeah. Yeah. So all in all, story and presentation of the game, I thought was just like generally like more relaxing than like a story that I was super compelled by, super interesting things that happen in the plot or something like that. Like I was into finding people in the investigation. Like, we have someone we got to find. I was into the idea of like, I need to, there's a guy that hangs out at this tattoo shop and I need to figure out a way to like get into the tattoo shop because I'm, Ryo's underage or whatever. And like, I got to figure out a way, or like maybe it's a bar and again, Ryo's underage. So I got to figure out a way to get into this bar. I was interested in that stuff, like to get the information, to get the plot moving. Overall, like I didn't love the story, but I did enjoy the experience of going through it. And I think it is mostly that the town, like we've said several times now, the town feels alive enough that when I'm given this new story scenario, like, oh, these people I'm looking for hang out at the harbor, I'm going to have to figure out a way to like go ingratiate myself at the harbor. The way the game is built lets me do that in a way that I thought was interesting and that I felt like I was following clues given by the game mixed with my own ideas of like how to follow up on those. Because Ryo has a journal where he'll write like, men in black suits seen near this store. That's all they say. They don't say, go to this store at this time. Not all the time. They don't give you like direct clues. Sometimes you do need to figure some stuff out for yourself as to like how to proceed. So I did have fun going through that. Gameplay kind of like goes along those lines. Like it's mainly centered around this investigation, but you're on this like day-night schedule, time schedule in the game, and you have a goal. You always have a goal, but you don't have like, you don't have like time limits really for a lot of them. Like you have time limits for little like optional cutscenes and character interactions. And there's a ton of those, which are cool too. But your goal, let's say you need to talk to some people at this tattoo shop. You figure out how to get into the tattoo shop. And the thing about this game that I think was probably most, influential and sounded the coolest to me back then was like the tattoo shop's not open all the time. You need to go there when it's open. Maybe this guy you're looking for is not there the whole time. So you kind of have free reign. You're on this schedule. You need to do things within certain time periods. And this is not perfect, I don't think, but I don't know, investigation, we'll say. Like my theories of like, okay, I need to do this by a certain time. How do I do this? The game's not telling me straight out, so I can go and investigate that on my own. I thought that this was like genuinely pretty fun to figure out how to accomplish these things.
Yeah, this is one of the aspects of the game that draws a lot of criticism from modern players. It's like waiting for specific times to go. The tattoo shop is one of the classic examples of that. And then there's also a situation later in the game, not to get too much into spoilers, but regarding like a travel agency where they give you like specific times, several times. And I get it. I mean, from a design standpoint and what Yu Suzuki and company were trying to do, it definitely adds to the immersion. And it was definitely something very like novel at the time. So a lot of that initially felt like, oh, this is a real world, right? Like it's just like, in retrospect, I do see that as I think it's, in my opinion, it's bad game design in the sense of, I mean, you don't really have many ways to. It's one thing if you want to get that experience, but if you want to fast forward that, you really didn't have like that many options like back then, so you were kind of stuck.
That's the biggest thing. Like, I loved when it was like, go to the tattoo shop or whatever, go to this place between these hours, and it was like an hour into the future. And it's like, okay, I need to kill an hour. Like you can go play arcade games or you can go practice karate in the parking lot, which is very funny. Like the image of Ryo going to this empty parking lot to just like punch air for an hour. Like just think of the people in the flower shop across from that parking lot, just being like, what the fuck is up with this guy? Just out there, doing punches and kicks. But like, if it's like, you wake up at 7:30 in the morning and it's like, go to this place at 4 p.m. You really don't have a good way to get to 4 p.m. in an interesting way unless you really fucking love, Space Harrier or something like that.
I mean, it's a great game, and it's and those are really good versions of those games too. That Space Harrier and and Hang On. But it's definitely like a problem. I think this time around, since I've played it so many times, I see this coming. So it's like, oh, I'm gonna like try to plan this or do this around this time. Or quite frankly, I just like leave the game on and I go and like do something else and just like time it myself and go back to it. It definitely takes like some adjustments now. We have like all these like fast forward features and all these things to do, and it definitely is like a different pace. But if one is more generous with the game, and going back to like from the design perspective, it's supposed to be something. So then not only do you feel more immersed, but then you go out there and engage with other systems and other things to do. And back in 2000, this felt very big. It felt like, oh, this is like a big space. And some of the systems were still like somewhat new. We didn't have, a lot of folks still didn't really like, weren't comfortable like handling a character in a 3D space. Not that the game itself does like a great job with its 3D controllers, but it's it is what it is.
Yeah, it's like the romantic view of it, the generous view of it would be to say that like giving you all that downtime forces you to engage with the things that they've like pretty meticulously built in the world, these characters on their schedules and side activities and stuff. I just don't think there's enough that passes time. Like you can spend your time going through the shopping street and talking to the shop owners and stuff, but that doesn't kill that much time to make a, like a full lap around the street or anything like that. You're still you're going to need to go play a bunch of arcade games, or you're going to need to practice your martial arts in the parking lot. Or, like you said, I think bringing up Ryo's watch, like you have a watch item, and if you click on it in your inventory, he'll look at his watch. It'll take up the whole screen, and time goes like slightly faster if you look at your watch. So what I would do is I would bring up the watch, and then I would, look at Blue Sky or something like that, and, check back at what time. Or, if I had to wait even longer, like I would, let the dog outside or something like that and come back. It is like the flaw of this particular implementation in Shenmue 1. Because like thinking of other games, like I recently played Deadly Premonition, which is super inspired by Shenmue. And in that game, you have the magic cigarette that fast forwards time. I don't necessarily like want a Majora's Mask 3D, like skip ahead to this certain time mechanic. Like, I think that would break a little bit of this, but I would wish, and like my hope for future Shenmue games is that there is just more stuff that if you have 6 hours to kill until the next main story beat, let me get those 6 hours a little bit quicker. Even if I have to do something to pass the time, give me more things to do. That's the thing.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I like the example you brought up of something like Majora's Mask, which didn't come out, which came out around the same time as Shenmue, and it's
2000, I think.
Yeah, and it's something where I think Nintendo had a better grasp on that system, because on the whole like time system. I mean, it was integral to the game itself. So and even in the original version, you have like the songs that you can play to like skip like segments of the day, etc. So that was already being taken into consideration, and there was just more to do, and stuff.
That's
not only like main quest stuff, but side quests and other things that you would gain something, as a player, like as a character. With Shenmue, really, what do you have? You have like, you can practice your moves, and I guess trying to find like scrolls or find some information about folks. I think a lot of that, like design choices in Shenmue come from the fact that it's an adventure game. Like, it's in the lineage of adventure games, specifically Japanese adventure games. So talking about stuff like Portopia's serial murder case, by Enix, famously, designed by Yuji Horii of Dragon Quest fame, and Famicom Detective Club, which you see that when you're interacting with folks, where you're asking them questions just to try to get like specific keywords or specific like answers, and then Ryu will jot that down. And then that would proceed like the plot like forward to like stuff to do. So following this very like simplistic like model by design, like those games were very simplistic because they're meant to like cater to like a general like broad audience. Well, not Famicom Detective Club, that was like infamously difficult. But Portopia, for example, though, that was one of those games, and Shenmue did that, but then also integrated this aspect of like this live world without much consideration of time for the actual like player. I think a lot of that's also too, they were just enamored with like the shiny new toy and the tech. It's like, this is great. Like, who wouldn't want to like walk around and like engage with this? Which, I mean, it's partly true, but it definitely doesn't age very well.
Yeah, I think one of the other things is that, and I'm not like mad at the game for not having this, but it would have helped pass more time, and it would have helped you feel more inspired to spend more time going around talking to people. Is just like NPC dialogue is pretty limited depending on like where you are in the story. And like, it might be unreasonable to ask NPCs to have more dialogue lines or something like that for a Dreamcast game. But when I was faced with, I have 4 hours to kill until this shop opens that I need to go to for the main quest. And I'm like, I'm tired of practicing my moves in the parking lot, and I'm tired of playing Space Harrier. Like I would be like, well, I could go talk to the people, but like, they're not really going to have anything to say. And again, it doesn't pass that much time. So it's just like, it's almost there. You can see where it was going, and you can see where other games took it, and perhaps Shenmue 2 and 3. I know Shenmue 2 has a fast forward time. At least I think I read that. So, yeah, it's just one of the things in this game. Luckily, or maybe unluckily for some people, at a certain point, Ryo doesn't need to go on the street investigating and going to shops when they're open, because he gets a job at the harbor. And so you're going to spend a lot of time, and like you're not going to be wondering how you're going to pass 6 hours in the second half of the game, because Ryo has to drive a forklift at work, and he works from like 8:30 to 5 or something like that. So like it takes up most of your days driving the forklift. And the forklift controls are really simple, and your job is each day you'll get a location to go pick up boxes and a location to drop the boxes off at. And they get a little bit more complicated. Sometimes you have like a couple stops to make and stuff like that. But this ends up taking a huge portion of the game. Like your time spent playing Shenmue, you will spend actual hours driving the forklift. And I, for one, I thought it was relaxing. I really liked it. You also do forklift races before work every day. Like for working at a harbor, it's a pretty chill job. Like you race forklifts before work. He gets a 2-hour lunch break, and seems like a pretty cozy, like quotas are very reasonable for how many boxes you have to move. Seems like a pretty chill job out at the harbor there.
Yeah, except for the gangs just trying to kill
except for the gangs.
everybody.
Yeah, you're right.
But yeah, outside of the gangs is definitely, yeah, I think we briefly like had like a conversation on Blue Sky about that job, and it's just
yeah,
it is like I would drop my life right now for a job like that. In circa 2024, you're outside, you're like moving stuff. It's just,
yeah,
your coworkers are pretty neat, I think.
Yeah,
like,
they're
there's
cool.
some nice coworkers that he works around, and yeah, and you're getting a raise like every day.
Yeah.
Like, so if
they give you this like, hey, do this extremely reasonable quota, like move 8 boxes in 8 hours, and then you'll get a raise every single day. It's pretty sweet.
Which, I mean, it's not like a lot of money even back then, like especially when you consider it's like the bubble economy in Japan. But if you follow that logic, right, Ryo lives in his house. He doesn't pay, he's not paying any bills, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
He, in a few months, he's making some of the best pay in the world, probably.
Yeah.
He's making health CEO money,
Yeah.
We're doing something that is not harming anyone. I mean,
right. Just moving boxes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's
getting in a few fights at lunchtime, but
yeah,
you'll
well,
have that.
Those people had it coming though.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, I don't know. Did you enjoy like in the game doing the forklift stuff? Cause it's like a lot of your playtime.
Yeah, I did. And it's definitely, it definitely breaks the pacing. I think if this was something that was initially something that you would be doing from the get-go, I think I would feel a lot more tired of it. But because you've had, at this point, depending how you're playing, like 6 to 7 hours of, waiting for stuff, just going about town and then getting like this change. And the pacing helps a lot because then you have, you just have 2/3 of your day, and then the other third, you're following up like the investigation and everything. It's like a weirdly well-paced part of the game, which like on paper it doesn't look like it. You're just like, oh my god, he's doing the same thing like all the time.
But it moves like
it does.
It's like a lot of these like life sim games, like think of a Persona or even like a Stardew Valley or something like that. Like you move through the days much more quickly when you're driving the forklift, because you're not spending time just like waiting for 4 o'clock on the street with nothing to do anymore. Like, you're going to go through, you're going to actually like do the game, play the game. What you're doing is driving the forklift, but you're playing the game, you're engaging with something. And then when it's over, you got a couple hours to investigate stuff, and then it's time to go home and go to bed. And then the day turns over. So like, I actually agree with you. Like, I think this back part with the forklifts is like against all odds better paced than the first half of the game because of that.
Yeah, it's miraculous. I mean, there's like a lot about this game too, as you were stating like in your introduction. There's a lot of parts on it that today and even back then were not so good, but somewhat like when you add everything together, like it really like Shenmue really becomes like something special. And yeah, this later half of the game is it's like that. And I think we are more like primed to like this type of stuff now because of games like Stardew Valley, like Persona. I think of something like actually when I was playing it this time around, I was thinking a lot about Fire Emblem like Three Houses. Like some of like the structure for. I mean, it's still like very different games, but this whole like as a player yourself too, you're able to cater. If you're not like in a rush with the game, you're like, okay, I'll do like one day in Shenmue, like a day for me. So it's like, I'll do some forklift stuff, and then afterwards I'll do like some investigating, and then I'll continue like the next day type of situation. And I mean I think that's a healthier way of doing it, and one doesn't get as tired of it.
Yeah, for sure. You hit something that I wanted to like kind of wrap the gameplay section up with, which is that I think this game is begging you to slow down to its speed. It's something I talked about in the Red Dead Redemption 2 episode, which is another game that is like just begging you to not try and play it like Grand Theft Auto. Slow down to the speed the game is operating at. Shenmue's doing that too. It's just, in Shenmue, I think Shenmue slows down too much sometimes. But it is a game that is just operating on a different tempo than, basically everything else. Like even other games that came after it that are doing the same sort of like live on a schedule, like a Deadly Premonition, or Persona really speeds up these day-to-day things. Like you can fly through weeks in Persona in an hour of play if you're at the right section of the game. Shenmue's not like that at all, really. You really have to slow down. It's asking you to, it's begging you to. And so if you can just like relax while you're playing it, I would assume this is a bad game to play on a deadline or something like that. But if you can just chill, like you said, maybe like play one day in Shenmue per day or a couple days per day or something like that. Just take it easy. I think that like, again, there are the flaws. There's not enough ways to pass time. The combat's terrible. There's a lot of flaws to it, but like I found this game charming. And then like the thing that if I said, the listeners might be hearing or watching and being like, okay, so you spend a dozen hours driving a forklift. That sounds like it sucks. It's actually, I really like that part. Like I like driving the forklift. I like doing the job. I like getting a raise every day. And I like the way that section is paced. So like, it's a really weird game, but if you slow down to what speed it's operating at and kind of like just take it in, it does end up being greater than the sum of its parts. Like this is a game where if you have like a rubric for grading games, it's not going to grade out very well, I don't think. But there's an intangible thing. And I don't think that like as critics, I don't think it's responsible to ignore the intangible feeling that you would get playing something like this. It's not, and like, I don't think everyone's going to get that feeling playing Shenmue. I think it's a pretty divisive game at this point in gamer, conversations, but those intangibles do matter. It's part of the experience when you're playing something. So like it almost doesn't matter to me. Like I'm not going to look back on Shenmue in 6 months and be like, yeah, the combat was terrible and I was pretty bored sometimes. So bad game. I'm not going to remember Shenmue like that. I think that those intangibles really win out in a way that a lot of games don't leave me with that sort of feeling. But yeah, as far as gameplay goes, I enjoyed this pretty consistently.
Yeah, and I hope that you had, that you also weren't playing it. You weren't like crunching like the game
No.
essentially, and that really helps the game. And one of the things that like underrides Shenmue's like design and a lot of stuff that's really not very much appreciated and not discussed enough when it comes to like certain like the design like philosophies when it comes to like larger like Japanese like made games. We're talking about specifically something like Dragon Quest or even like Yakuza like a Dragon is they're made to a point where it's like they're not made for you to just like just spend like 8 hours straight. If you work,
Yeah.
I mean, you can do that if you want, but they're made as games that if it takes you a year, that's fine. My friend Tim Rogers always like talks about this regarding Dragon Quest, where it's like like a game
Mm-hmm.
that you play before like bedtime. It's like you play like 30 minutes to an hour, right, and then you go to sleep, and then you do that the next day, and that pacing really like helps you like appreciate it. Because I do remember playing something like Dragon Quest 11, which is an extremely long game. I mean,
Yeah.
but it's when I was just playing in like short bursts, even if it was for months on end, I was having a hell of a time. But I've the pandemic hit, and then I like started like just playing that like for hours on end, and I was getting like really tired of it,
Yeah.
really tired. And Shenmue definitely is a game where you're even more prone to that because you don't have a lot of these, quote unquote, like quality of life, like improvements and all these things when it comes to like the gameplay. It's something that you should take your time with it, and you will definitely like enjoy it like a lot more.
Yeah, that happened to me with Dragon Quest 11 too. I tried to chug that game and I ended up really not liking it. And I heard after the fact exactly what you said. Like it's meant to be a bedtime story more than a something you play 4 hours a day. So maybe I'll go back to it or keep that in mind, the next time I play a Dragon Quest game. But I agree with you. Shenmue is definitely better that way too. Although like I did have a couple of, 3-hour sessions playing Shenmue, just driving the forklift, listening to podcasts, having a good time doing that. We didn't talk about the music yet. The music is pretty good too. It's credited to Takenobu Mitsuyoshi and Yuzo Koshiro, composed some songs for the soundtrack, who I know from like Streets of Rage and stuff like that. But it's a soundtrack that like lays in the background, and so the it's really fucked up. The song I associate most with Shenmue is Tom's song from his boombox, but the rest of the score is really good. Like if you go on YouTube and listen to it, it's really good music. It's just like not the point of any of the scenes that it's in. Really, it's there for dramatic effect and emotion and things like that. But I would like, doing the forklift sections, I'd throw on podcasts and just kind of just chill, just do the job, kind of like I do when I'm doing my real job. My wife made fun of me for working in the video games, driving the forklift after I was done with my real work. But yeah, that's good. And then I didn't want to get out of here without mentioning the music. It is good music.
Yeah, it's very good. It's like it's like a J drama. If anybody's watched any of like the NHK like programming as well, like it's definitely fits like that mood. It's great music. So
Yeah.
I'm not trying to like undermine it. It's actually one of my favorite like video game scores, especially like for what it does like with the game.
Mm-hmm.
And Koshiro just has really great like pieces in that score. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's definitely a more of like accompaniment, and it's not as flashy as one expects now from a lot of, especially like triple A, like really like expensive games like this. And it's kind of like antithetical to a lot of other Sega games too, even like the smaller ones, right, which have like super like catchy tunes as you're doing like repetitive things, but it's still like a great score.
Yeah, we end up like, when we talk about music a lot on the podcast, we end up being like the music did its job. It was very pleasant. It backed up the scenes really well, and I have not much else to say about it. And it feels like it's selling it short, but it is a good soundtrack. It does do its job. and stuff like that. So let's get into our kind of like wrap up thoughts here before we do our little spoiler talk about Shenmue here. So Luis, it's an interesting question in 2024 going into 2025 here. Who would you recommend play Shenmue? Who do you think this appeals to?
It's a great question. I think there's two sets of people that I would recommend this to. I would recommend this to somebody who wants to learn more about Japan and who wants to study Japanese, who's like early in studying Japanese.
Okay.
The second is actually someone who is getting into video games like for the first time. I'm saying like who hasn't really even played like a 3D game.
Okay.
I would say. I mean, that's extremely rare now, but if they exist, like I would show this to like my grandmother, for example. I mean, that might be a little too bold, but I think there's enough here to like grab specific types of like folks because I mean, yeah, the story's not the most engaging, but there's enough there. And I just find it like it's very like endearing, and the pace of the game as well is not, and it's not it's something I forgot to mention earlier. It's like it's not a sensational game. It's not really. I mean, yeah, some of the characters are like out there, but but overall though, like your day to day, like in the game, it's very mundane, and I think a lot of people, especially a lot of like new gamers, they somewhat gravitate to like more like mundane like themes, and Shenmue definitely has that in spades.
I can see that. Yeah. I think the pitch for Shenmue is still pretty strong. Like you're in this neighborhood in Japan, the characters all have their schedules and their lives. The game is running on a day and night cycle. You'll get to know this town and the people who live there. It feels like that pitch shouldn't be as rare as it still is. Like there are obviously a lot of games that do stuff like that now, but not as many as you would think. Like Shenmue at its core is still a pretty small scale game that's really focusing on those things. It's the town, it's the inhabitants, it's the people, the lives they're living and stuff like that. And there are still not a lot of games that do that in particular. So if that sounds cool, then I would recommend people check out Shenmue. Obviously the people who like want to check out, you know, if I were to make a fictional list of the 50 most influential video games of all time, Shenmue might be on that list. And if you're interested in checking that type of game out, you should probably think about checking out Shenmue. And then the last group of people, obviously, if you're a huge fan of the Yakuza series and you want to see those roots, go back and try Shenmue. It's real cheap. You can play it on PC, play it on PlayStation. You can emulate it. You'll see a lot in there where you're like, holy shit, that's, you know, like if you've played a lot of the Yakuza games, you get used to a lot of these situations that keep coming up, or the types of characters and the types of moments, we'll say, that come up. And you'll see those moments in Shenmue, like almost shot for shot. And so for the Yakuza fans out there, if you haven't played this, give it a try, if not just to see that. And then to drive the forklift for a while. I feel like it's a rite of passage. You got to drive the forklift. So
you're not a true gamer until you drive the forklift.
That's right. Yeah, we saved the gatekeeping until now. You are not a true gamer until you've driven that forklift, until you've won a forklift race. So, yeah, it's an interesting game to recommend because it's a qualified recommendation. I don't think this game is super fun to play. And like we've talked about, like the combat's not good. Stuff like that. It hurts the recommendation on its face. But I do think there is that intangible quality to it, that it is a very pleasant game to play. I got frustrated during some of the fights, for sure. We'll talk about one in the spoiler section here that really pissed me off, but I got through it, and there's like less than 10 fights in the entire game anyway. So it's really not about that. It's just something you got to do from time to time. So qualified recommendation, but one that I feel pretty strongly that like a lot of people actually should check this game out. So let's do a little bit of housekeeping before spoilers here, where we start housekeeping by talking about the stuff that the guest does. And at the top of the show, I listed a bunch of stuff that Luis here is doing. A lot of writing, some podcasting here and there, other stuff. So please tell people about the things that you do and where they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm primarily a game critic for Pop Matters, where I cover game studies, a few other things. Sometimes I write. Pop Matters is mainly a music publication. I mean, one of the oldest independent online magazines, and dating back to 1999. But I mainly cover video games here. We recently released our best games of 2024 list.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also a contributor with NPR, which we also released recently our best games of 2024. A very good list, one that I'm very proud of. We got a lot of games there that I think you're not really going to find in other lists. We also incorporate tabletop games as well on the list. So just like games like more broadly. I'm a contributing editor at Gamers with Glasses, which is a smaller publication, but one where it's definitely like growing. And I'm running a series there, which actually started this week on JRPGs. With edited a piece by the great Autumn Wright on the Trails in the Sky series. Like check
That's
that
right.
out. It's like it's really really great. We have a few other things coming. I have a book review on probably the premier academic book on JRPGs, which should be released if not by the end of this year, early next year, and we have a few other things like following up. We're gonna get deep on what is a JRPG, like have a lot of conversations that haven't really been had before, and if they have, like sell them from like the perspective of some of like the writers. I definitely have a lot of opinions
Okay.
on it. Um, yeah, I mean, you can find me on Blue Sky, and I have a blog. It's aguaspoints.com. And my Blue Sky, I should know it, but I completely forgot what it is. It's Aguas Points, at Aguas Points,
Right.
at Blue Skies. You can find me there. I'm not as good at this pitching for myself as I should be. But oh yeah, and the last thing, so I'm a member of the New York Video Games Critics Circle, and we have one thing that's not known about us. We actually have one of the biggest, most important like game awards out there, like in the world, which is the New York Game Awards, which that's going to be January 21st,
Okay.
2025. And we have we always give a lifetime achievement award. This year is going to be to Sam Lake of
Ooh,
Remedy, which he's going to be there. He's going to be giving a speech. So
nice.
a lot of good games. We're tallying up, the games of the year and like all these other awards that we have. It's definitely an exciting year. I think personally, this is the best year for video games in regards to like video games coming out. A lot of it has to do with indie games. I think
Mm-hmm.
just the quality of the games this year have been, and just like the innovation scene is stuff that I've never seen before. And and I'm a professional critic. I play too many games.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I will definitely link all of that stuff that you talked about down in the show notes, including if people want to check out. By the time this episode comes out, that award show will be past, but I'm sure people can check that out somewhere. So let me know where people can. I'll throw it down there as well. But I definitely would like to direct people to the writing that you do, for your job, and then those things that you contribute to as well. I've seen some of the Game of the Year lists that you contributed to. And, we're going to do a virtual handshake on all the praise for 1000 Times Resist this year. What a
Yeah,
game.
yeah, it's incredible. I interviewed
You interviewed Remy. Yeah.
Remy. So, and that's as part of the New York Video Games Critics Circle. And I reviewed that game, and I've had that game added to 2 games of the year list. And we'll see what
Yeah.
happens with the New York Game Awards.
Right. So yeah, people can check out the list at Pop Matters, the list at NPR that you contributed to, and then your own writing is really interesting as well too. Like I will recommend people go check out the article you wrote about Final Fantasy VIII, because that was a trip. if people want to get a taste. So I'll put links down in the show notes so people can easily find all that stuff. You don't have to go searching. And then, give them a follow on Blue Sky and all that stuff. Be on the lookout for, a lot of stuff in a lot of places. So,
right. Yeah, I appreciate you, Dave. You're a gracious host.
Well, I'm happy to have you here. This was it's been good. We've got spoilers coming up. Let me plug myself here, phrasing, and then we'll take our spoiler break. But if people want to support this podcast, I will recommend the Discord server, of course, as always. But Shenmue is a really interesting game. If you've got thoughts about Shenmue, pop in the Discord server and chat about it. I don't feel like there's a lot of people who are super ambivalent about Shenmue. Everyone has opinions, I think. So that's a good place to do it. You can leave a rating and review if you've enjoyed this podcast. It will help people find this episode. Likes and comments on YouTube, of course, help boost the algorithm. And Patreon is the place to go if you want to support monetarily. That's patreon.com/realdavejackson. And I also have another show. It's called a Top 3 podcast where we do top 3 lists. We do drafts and other comedic episodes like that. So that is all about me. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, it will be full spoiler time for Shenmue. All right, before we get into spoilers for Shenmue, there is one announcement about a guest appearance I did on a podcast this week. The same day that this episode comes out, March 5th, I am on the 1H1D 1 Hour 1 Decision podcast to talk about my first hour playing Avowed and whether we want to continue playing after that first hour. I'll link that down in the show notes. Once again, that's 1 Hour 1 Decision, 1H1D. It was a real fun time talking with Chris and Tom about that first hour, so please check it out. And, as always, I'd like to say thank you to the wonderful patrons who help support the show. Big shout out to Chris Nelson, the Top 3 Podcast crew, Zulgeek, Chris Copleen, Eric Guess, Rick Firestone, Nick Vicori, Jill, Soccer, Cupcake, Kyle, Christian S., Matt aka Stormageddon, JD, Doug Leaf, Jason Emery, Brian Skirsha, Jenny E., Marcus O'Neill, David Stecco, Stefan, Drellish, Rob Smith, Rigamort, and many more. Thank you all for your generous support. It means the world to me. If any of you would like to be like them, you can do that at patreon.com/realdavejackson. Support the work that I do. It is greatly appreciated. And with that being said, let's get on to full spoiler time for Shenmue. All right, we're back, and it is full spoiler time now for Shenmue, so if you don't want to be spoiled on the story, please leave. We're not going to take care to go in chronological order or anything like that. Although this is a light and unfinished story in this game, so we're not going to be here for a long time talking about plot and stuff like that. But I do have a question to kick off the spoiler section for you, Luis. That framing thing of the young woman with the eagle and stuff like that out in the on the side of a mountain and stuff. Does that have story significance later on, or is that just like in later games, or is that just there to kind of like frame up like this journey that Ryo is going on as it is a coming of age story in some ways, right? So like, is that just like dramatizing that, or is that actually an important character sometime?
It's an important character. I don't know how much spoilers we're gonna get on Shenmue 2.
Okay,
but she's
maybe we'll save that till I play it. But yeah,
okay, yeah. So she's definitely an integral character on. I mean, It's funny because she's on the box art of Shenmue 1.
Yeah.
But it's not really until Shenmue 2 and then Shenmue 3 that you see more of her. It's essentially, so the Shenmue as a series has this whole thing of this like prophecy, which like which is Ryu is supposed to be, I guess, like the hero essentially. It's a little bit more to it, but really it's just that opening cutscenes and then some of those intimate cutscenes, they're really just like alluding to that, right?
Yeah,
Alluding to Shenmue to Ryu and Ryu's journey to essentially Hong Kong
right.
um, and the surrounding areas.
Yeah, because that's how, I said the game the story is unfinished here. And that's kind of what we mean. Like, you don't actually catch Lan Di in this Shenmue 1 here. You figure out he's gone to Hong Kong and Ryo gets on a boat and goes to Hong Kong. And so Shenmue 2 takes place in Hong Kong, I suppose. And he's just on his way there. There's no real resolution to the story in Shenmue 1 except you save Nozomi after she gets kidnapped by the mad angels in the harbor there. But that's about it. So like, I don't like doing plot recaps in the spoiler section here if all the plot recap is going to be is just saying what happened. And that's kind of what a Shenmue recap would be, in my opinion, unless you wanted to like really, it's just a really light story. The one thing is just talking a little bit about Ryo as a character and like kind of the nature of this revenge plot that he's on. I think you see this in a lot of stories like this, but it's definitely a focal point in Shenmue that he gets so wrapped up in this investigation that he neglects everybody else in his life. There's there's Nozomi who's got a crush on him. Ryo is very much like he's all business, right? He kind of gives her the cold shoulder a bunch of times. There's other people in his life that are really worried about him. He doesn't really care. Like it's not that he doesn't care, but he doesn't care that they're worried. Like he's all business. That's really like the biggest thing about this story as far as, themes that I latched onto. Really, it's like you got this character on a path for revenge, and that's all they care about. Tunnel vision on the path for revenge.
Yeah, he was completely consumed by his quest for revenge. Avenging his father's death at the hands of Lang Di. And I think the game does a really good job at showing that. I mean, essentially, that's his whole. Well, I mean, you as a player, you can decide to like play like arcade games and like feed a cat and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
but to drive the story forward, all that you're doing is essentially trying to find out information on Lang Di. I mean, to the point that you get a job as like a forklift driver, like at a port.
Yeah.
It's like that's I don't know, ambition's the word, but that's being consumed by something that you're gonna become a forklift driver. And it's like he's supposed to be in school. There's all these questions.
Yeah, like he's like, what is he, like 17 or something? Like,
I think he's 17.
Mean, you would think, so many Japanese games, like you play a high school student. Ryo is a high school student. He's high school age, but yeah, you're right. It was kind of funny to me that it's like he never once considers going to school. Like I get the feeling he's not enrolled in a school. He's just doing martial arts.
Well, I mean, they refer to him as like a school boy, and there's stuff like in the story that seems that he is going to school and is a student. I mean, Natsumi, for example, like they know each other from school, and the way that they speak to each other, more in the Japanese version, when they just refer to each other by like their first names. That's something within Japanese society and culture that you're only going to speak to somebody like that if you know them your whole life, like through school. There's like no honorifics or anything between them.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I mean, I like thinking about stuff like this. I call this like the Roadrunner Wile E. Coyote paradox, where it's like, on its face value, it's entertaining, but the more you think about it, the more you get out of it, right? Because it's like, wait, why does this keep happening? Like, why does he keep buying gadgets from Acme? Yeah. Like, like this type of, it's like this is like, wait, why is Ryu just like showing up at these places? Wait, like, why does everybody just wants to like straight up kill him? Like on first sight. It's just like on first sight. It's, I know it's a lot of it's like, like video game plots and stuff, but it's it's like fairly entertaining. And then like everybody's a kung fu master in this town, or a martial artist or something. It's like when Tom teaches you like the tornado kick, like at the essentially the
Yeah.
end of the game, you're like, wait, Tom, you had moves like that, Tom?
Yeah. Or
Why are you hiding this?
the homeless guy in the harbor
Oh,
turns out to teach you a bunch of moves too. Like he's an old master. Yeah.
That's the funniest part because he's like, you meet him while he's getting his ass kicked.
Yeah.
But but then he's like, wait, but you know how to do all this stuff?
He's like, yeah, I could have kicked their asses, but it's better for me not to. Yeah. So
he's like, he doesn't want to go to jail again, right? It's like, he's like,
either that or he's just transcended beyond like, it's not worth it for me to fuck these guys up. So yeah. Yeah. It now that you add in the fact that, and I had forgotten the fact that he's, school age still, it adds to the fact that he's got this tunnel vision, right? Like he never once considers going to school. Well, maybe it's during a break or something, because no one's like Nozomi's not going to school either.
Yeah, it's like winter. It's supposed to be winter break, but the game is such that
he's simply not studying. We'll just say that. Like, yeah.
No, he's not. And the game, there are really neat things within like the game which are hard for a lot of people to engage with because you kind of like have to like spend like a lot of time like in game days. But there's the boat just leaves at certain points. There's like a point in the game where the boat essentially like leaves. If you most people
if you just wait too long?
Yeah, like most people, well, essentially the game just ends to a certain degree. And I don't remember if Ryu like gets on the boat or if it's like a quote unquote like bad ending or something. But it's been like that one's been like 15 years since I've seen that. But I do remember that I just like spent so much time. I just wanted to break the game in the sense like try to do like all these things, like not focus on like the narrative. And then eventually like I got like this like weird like cutscene. I was like, wait, what? So
just having fun driving the forklift.
So I think it is supposed to be based on it's a break, and this is going on during this break. Now he does leave and like go to like Hong Kong, and that's not during like that. The time for that is not like a break from school. Like he clearly like abandoned his studies. I mean, he even like leaves like the dojo, and like which essentially he's the inheritor of it. Right. Yeah. And he like leaves that like behind and everything. Like he's completely consumed like his quest for revenge on it. Yeah. And it's somewhat it's a game that's so understated in a way where like for a lot of like modern, even at the time, for a lot of like modern like audiences and like players, like you kind of miss that. Right. You kind of like have to fall within like the subtleties to like get that. Wait, he's not taking care of like his responsibilities in any way, right? Because now we're so used to more of this will be driven like in specific different other like narrative points, like in games. It's like, like he's not. Well, one thing that we do know for a fact, he never showers.
That's right. Yeah.
So he never, which is just mind boggling. Like for me, it's like one of the biggest issues with the game for me is that it's like, I wish there was just like the option that you can just like go and it's like he takes a bath.
Yeah, just pop in, pop out. Quick little like, cutscene transition. Just give you the option. Yeah.
It's very odd, especially looking from like he seems to be from like a very like rigid family, specifically like probably like old time samurai family. They're showering twice a day. You're going to that onsen once a day. Like it's like that's just me being picky here, but it's like bother me.
It is something you notice. I mean, like you notice in every video game when like the protagonist lays down in bed in their clothes and it's like they just, it's hard to model someone like, they would have had to model him in different clothes or something, and I think they do. It's just like the undershirt when he goes to bed. But like, you know what I mean? Like people don't take their shoes off when they get in bed in video games.
Well, Rio does. Kudos to them.
When you go in and out of the house, there's that little thing. Yeah. But like, It is like one of those things, for all the ways that they made this into like a kind of realistic life sim thing, to not have like a, hey, just pop in, take a shower, it'll take 30 minutes off the clock, like that type of thing, would have been a little extra thing to do in the house there. But
Yeah, Hasuki was rolling in his grave for
yeah,
his son. Every time his son just gets into bed with his street clothes, he's like,
yeah,
"Oh, I didn't raise you that way."
that same undershirt. Yeah, he's been practicing martial arts in the parking lot, fighting dudes, driving the forklift. Yeah, that's how driven he is, man. He doesn't give a shit about his hygiene. He just wants to catch the killer. That's all he cares about. He doesn't care about Nozomi and her crush on him. Doesn't care about how much people are worrying about him. That's all he cares about. He's like kind of a dick to the people that care about him. Like he helps when people need help. Like he's not like an asshole, but like he's very like cold towards the people that are expressing concern. There's Ine-san, the old woman in the house, and he's just kind of like, no, just, I'm good. Just trust me. She's like begging and crying in some scenes for him to like, please be careful. Like, please don't like throw your life away. And he's like, no, I'm fine. Nozomi is like really worried about him, and she's like desperately wanting to spend time with him, because one of the only other developing storylines for other characters is that she's going to have to go live in Canada. She's going to have to leave Japan, and that means they're not going to be able to spend as much time together. And she's like, she really wants to spend time with him, and he's like, nah, I got to drive this forklift. Like, I can't. I gotta go beat up I got to go to this bar at night. I got to beat these people up. I got to investigate. Like, he's just, how obsessed he is. He just like turns the cold shoulder to everybody in his life. Like, he is kind of a dick to everybody. And it's kind of interesting to see, like, he's the hero of the story, but he's not like the super lovable hero that is like great to everybody around him. Like, he's just too focused.
No, he is, and I didn't really consider him as a dick, but looking back at it, it's definitely true. Because I mean, he's polite. He's very polite when he speaks to people, even when people respond less so. He's still, for the most part, like he keeps like his cool. But yeah, his actual actions though are questionable. I mean, he takes. I'm blanking on his name now. The essentially the adopted like person at the dojo.
Oh, Fukusan. Yeah.
Fukusan. He takes Fukusan's life savings.
He does, yeah.
like Fukusan breaks his piggy bank. This grown man breaks a piggy. He has a piggy bank, and he doesn't even think twice about it. He's just like, yeah, I'm taking this money. And then the money gets stolen anyway, you know? And it's like no talk about that. It's like, oh yeah, sorry, like the whole.
And it's not like, you know, hey, I'm going to use this money I make getting a raise every day driving the forklift. I'm going to pay Fukusan back so he can get his life savings back. He's like, no, I need this for my boat ticket. Like, sucks what happened to your life savings, dude, but I need this money.
And it was a lot. It was like, how much was it? Like 20,000 yen or something?
It was a lot. Yeah.
And how much was that in like back in like this like bubble economy
1986?
So
yeah.
Oh my God. I have to check this out. I have to see how much this is like in US dollars, because this is like killing me.
It's in today's money. Yeah.
All right. This calculator's too complicated for this time right now. I don't want to take any more time.
But it was a
show.
It was like, this shit it was almost 40 years ago. Yeah. Just the amount of money, like, it was at the very least like hundreds of dollars, right? Maybe it wouldn't cost thousands of dollars to take a boat to Hong Kong, but anyway, it was a lot of money. It was this man's life savings. Even if it was just $200, it was this man's life savings. He broke the piggy bank, as you said, and Ryo just takes it. He's a taker throughout the story. Yeah,
this is very different from. There's like three key differences between the Yakuza series and Shenmue.
Yeah.
And this is one of them. Kiryu would have never taken, if he did, if he did, he would have the guy who gave him that money would have been a millionaire like in a few hours. It's
Yeah.
like it's like all this money I killed this guy around the corner for you to take.
I made all this money racing slot cars. Now here you go. Here's $1 million.
This is for you.
Yeah, that is a big difference. And like, I don't know, I think that we're having fun reading into it a bit more than the game like is probably asking you to read into it. But it is pretty funny to think about Ryo as just, you know, pretty selfish along the path here. And then like just the moment that made me think about this is like and this might just be a technical limitation, and they didn't want to model him smiling at the end when he takes that picture with Nozomi before he gets on the boat. But she's like, I want this picture to remember you by, like, you know, I love you. You're leaving. I'm leaving. Like, we're not going to see each other for a while. We need to take this picture. And he acts like it's a mugshot. Like he fucking mean mugs the camera as she's smiling at this farewell photo. And it might, again, just be like, hey, they didn't model him smiling in the entire game. They weren't going to do it for this. But it was a funny, like, cherry on top of this little, like, hey, Ryo's kind of like cold to everybody. He can't even smile for this picture.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely like a reading one can do of it. And I think it's intentional because they not only do you take the photo, right? You also see like the actual photograph on it. Yeah. And I think it's supposed to, and I think that's part of, and there's enough illusions within the game, like within like the story to leads like, you know, not only is he unhappy, he's just completely consumed by it. And I think parts of the second game lean in a little bit more on that, but it falters in its own way on there. And I think 3 tries to like hone that in more, but you know, it's definitely it's the most flawed like masterpiece that video games have. I think it's definitely flawed. It's not Megalopolis bad, but that's definitely not a masterpiece. But you know, it falls within that vein of you know, of creative works where it's definitely like vision, but you know, there's limitations. There's a lot of limitations that go into these things. Yeah,
there are a lot. You know, of course, technical limitations existed. They're much more limiting back then than they are now for people who have big ideas in video games. And so you can see technical limitations. You can see, you know, space limitations and time and probably budget limitations too, because it's ended up being really expensive. And I'm sure someone at Sega was like, hey man, wrap this shit up. Like this is costing us a lot of money. We got to put this game out. So it ends up being unfinished as far as the story goes. And they end up doing sequels that were progressively harder to make as the series went on. But there just is like this intangible magic to it. I wish I had better words to describe it. Maybe if I sat down and spent an entire day trying to put words together instead of, you know, speaking stream of consciousness at the end of a podcast here. But there is a magic to it. And it's a really uneven experience. And I definitely didn't love every second I was playing it. That, you know, at the end of the game, you have that 70-man melee, they call it, where you fight a bunch of dudes in a row and you have a guy helping you fight him. So you can like just hide and let him fight. He'll kill everyone except the boss characters. I think there's 4 boss fights in there. I did not like that section one bit. It was the hardest boss fight in the game that you have to beat. There's a bunch that you can just lose and the story will continue. But that one you have to actually win. So like I didn't love that. There's a bunch of times in the game where I felt like I wasn't, you know, fully loving what I was doing at that time. And so, you know, if you think about this game critically, it really depends what your values are as a critic. Like, do you really value the second to second, like, what is the game asking me to do right now, right this second? Because I think Shenmue is going to lose some people on that front. But I just think that the things that this game excels at lifted it above frustrations I would have, you know, in a mandatory boss fight or something like that. It's just a really weird and interesting and cool game. I'm glad that they made it. I'm glad that so many people were inspired by it, and I'm glad that it's still available. It's like not something you can like really take for granted these days. Like they remastered this, it's available everywhere. It's cheap. You can play it. So that, obviously don't take that for granted either.
Yeah. And I think it helps if one has experience with the Yakuza Like a Dragon games. I think there's a lot to be appreciated in Shenmue because one can
Yeah.
I mean I alluded to earlier that Yakuza has, I guess, like three major like distinctions between Shenmue. One being that the Yakuza main characters are not dicks, and and the other two is, one is that as Shenmue's like fighting style, fighting like system is very like virtual fighter. In Yakuza is more like Streets of Rage. And I think that's something that was learned as a result of Yoshihiro Nagoshi being part of the development team in Shenmue, like learning like what works and what doesn't. It's yeah, I really appreciate the game. And as a critic, I'm gonna be writing something about Shenmue in looking at it from a comparative perspective of Yakuza Kiwami, which recently came out on the Switch.
Mm-hmm.
Which actually, those games, if there is a Yakuza that's the most similar to Shenmue, it's probably that one.
Yeah, it'd
In
be the first one. Yeah.
Yeah, in certain regards, and even Kiwami, which is like a remaster, it's clunky enough that there are specific there's some similarities. There's still like very different games, but yeah, Shenmue is a special game. I mean, if you just look at the pedigree behind Shenmue, I mean, you have designers and game makers in that game that just even before that already. I mean, Yu Suzuki made Outrun. Outrun's like the greatest game ever made, like in my opinion. And it's like, and then from there you get, you have he makes like other games, and then something as ambitious, even if flawed, as like Shenmue. And I mentioned Toshihiro Nagoshi, who also worked on it. I mean, the guy did Super Monkey Ball, and with Yu Suzuki, Daytona USA, and then F-Zero GX, and it's people really trying to push for games to be more than just like a game. They're trying to make like an art object, for lack of better words. I mean, with all its flaws. And I think when one looks at it that way, there's definitely a lot that one can like appreciate from Shenmue. Yeah, if we're gonna be real, if we're gonna compare this to like a lot of like modern like action adventure games, it's not. It's Shenmue doesn't really like stand very. It doesn't stand very well if you're gonna compare it to Grand Theft Auto 5, for example, or Red Dead Redemption, or even like, I mean, the Yakuza games now. But those games all learned a lot from Shenmue, right? And a lot, and we wouldn't really have these games without Shenmue. At least not how they are. You learn a lot more from failed attempts than one does from like successes. Personally, I mean, because look at something like Super Mario like 64. That game pretty much nailed, like the 3D like navigation and traversal, right, within a platformer. I mean, the camera was still like wonky, but for the most part, even now it feels like pretty decent to play. And 3D games were still failing. I mean, Shenmue, for example, still use like tank controls and stuff, but it's from a lot of these like failures or less successful attempts, let's say, that one is able to deduce like a path like forward, right? Because if the game's like too good, I think I'm speaking from personal experience too, right? If you encounter something within like your field of work that is just like at the scene, if you're just like, I can't, like, I don't even know how, like, you just get like discouraged. You're like, wait, what? Like, you did. It's like, nah, I'm good. I'm not writing about that ever again, because the best thing was ever, it's you move on. And so Shenmue's a game that, it was created, and a lot of games like stand on its shoulders.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it's also interesting too, because like, if you are looking at something like this critically, you can look at it both ways. And it's something that I really struggle with, especially playing a lot of older games that I'm coming to for the first time. I can, like, from an academic sense, I can play this game and be like, yeah, I can see where other, games took what this game is doing. And I can appreciate that from an academic sense. But like, I don't enjoy my time playing that game. Like, Resident Evil 1 as an example. I don't like playing Resident Evil 1 really at all. But like, I can appreciate what Resident Evil did and what, was built after that within that series and in other series as well. But Shenmue, I did enjoy playing it too. So I get that benefit of, like, of course I can see where other games took what Shenmue is doing. And we talked about it in the Deadly Premonition episode. And now the next Yakuza game that I play, I'll have that much more appreciation for its roots and stuff like that. But there is that other part of it too, where I can appreciate the actual experience of playing Shenmue in a way that I don't appreciate the experience of playing some other like super influential games that are just, I don't have a great time with, because everyone has different experiences with that stuff. The interesting thing with Shenmue though is like, it's not like a, super pleasing, fun game to play. It's not. It's this really interesting art piece, like you said, that the things that I like about it are intangible: atmosphere and vibes and, camp in some cases we talked about earlier too. That stuff is endearing to me, and I enjoy driving the forklift. So it is a really interesting one. And it's been a really interesting one to talk about here with you. So I appreciate you coming on the show, talking about this game with me. And frankly, I probably wouldn't have played this if you didn't throw it on that list of games you pitched to me to do on the show. So I appreciate you planting that seed as well. So thanks, man. This has been awesome.
No, thank you. I mean, I'm glad that I got to revisit it. I mean, the last thing I'll say about it, I always think of the great poet rapper Ishmael Butler of Shabbat Palaces and Diggable Planets, where he talks about it's a feeling, it's something that you wake up to it, and then like your body travels. And Shenmue fall. I think as more time goes, like it falls more within like the realm of like art game than it's like anything else. Like its aesthetics and its game design really like make it lean towards like that. And I think currently, like if one would assess Shenmue critically, right, essentially, oh man, it's going to be 25 years actually, because Shenmue released on December 29th, 1999. So it's going to be 25 years soon, a quarter century. Can you believe that? And it's one has to evaluate it as that, as a cultural artifact, as art. And also looking at it as like what it inspired as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the goals of the podcast is always to, we can appreciate those things. And I think that we've talked, quite a bit about those things, but we also need to evaluate critically what the game actually is in the year 2024 as we played it, and 2025 as people are hearing this. And I think that we did hit on both of those things. And so like the play experience is, there's stuff to critique. There's stuff that's not great, but there is those other aspects. So I think we hit on both of those. So again, I appreciate you taking the time, and it's been a really fun conversation, a fun game to kind of poke at all these angles with. So again, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Good. And I will once again direct people to check down in the show notes for all of the things that Luis is doing and every place that he's contributing work to. So you can find those things down in the show notes. You don't need to go searching. Maybe as the music is playing us out of the episode, go find an article that looks interesting and go check it out. And if you've listened to the end, if you've watched to the end, you are my hero as always. And tune in next week for the next game to come out of the backlog.
Hey, you there! This is Nomad speaking. If you love retro video games and you're itching for some nostalgia, check out the Retro Wildlands podcast. In each episode, I'll use game music and sound to pull you into the gaming experience while I share my own thoughts and maybe a few memories. It's a great way to relive one of your favorite games or learn about a new one. Check out the Retro Wildlands podcast at superpodnetwork.com or wherever you listen to your podcast.
Hello, my name is Andrew.
I'm Dylan.
And I'm Aubrey.
And we are your friendly neighborhood gamers. Our podcast aims to cover the world of video games from the perspective of the average gamer. Whether you casually play games on your phone, have a high KD in Call of Duty, or you're somewhere in between, we believe that makes you a gamer, and our show is for you.
Since our podcast started in 2022, we have done deep dive episodes on over 40 games, including The Witcher 3, Diablo 4, Marvel Snap, Cult of the Lamb, and more.
We've also discussed a wide variety of topics such as video game music, toxicity in gaming, cozy games, games based on Star Wars, and video game genre definitions.
Additionally, it's our goal to use our show to shine a light on other awesome creators by inviting them onto our podcast for interviews. We've had the pleasure of talking to podcasters, streamers, cosplayers, musicians, authors, and Donkey Kong record holders.
If any of that sounds interesting to you, we would love for you to check out our show. You can find us on all of the podcast platforms, YouTube, and on our website, fngamers.com.